Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this BPM Suite webinar hosted by Tier 2 Consulting. My name is Chris Ellis, and as you can see from the screen, I'm Head of Marketing and New Business for Tier 2 Consulting. I'm here with my colleague, John Cornforth, who'll be taking the controls shortly and running through the BPM demo, which is being recorded, so you will have a download link after this webinar finishes. You can see that you'll have a Q&A chat box functionality on your screen. Fire questions as we go, but we'll deal with them at the end if we may, just to keep the flow of the demo running. But that's great, do that. We've also put together a Q&A slide towards the end, which might head off some of those queries that you've got. Just before John jumps into the demo itself, just let me give you a couple of slides very briefly, I promise, about Tier 2 and about what we do. So you can see on the screen in terms of who we are. We were the first Red Hat Premier Middleware Solutions Partner in the UK and Ireland back in 2014. That's validated and based on accredited skills rather than sales volumes. More than happy to be reselling JBoss middleware subscriptions, of course, but we have a significant amount of skills around the technology to achieve that Premier Partner status. And incidentally, John here has been voted very highly rated as a trainer by participants of Red Hat training in the past, and we've had other trainers. So between us, we've got sort of 1 and 2 training caps in our feathers, and John has even delivered training in French fluently. He speaks fluent French. So our skills around and knowledges around JBoss middleware go way back to before JBoss was Red Hat, and got deep knowledge in around enterprise application platforms, Fuse ESP, and the BPM suites, as we're going to talk about here, moving up into the current world of container management platforms, OpenShift and 3Scale API, etc. I mean, simple question: why do we exist? Why are we doing that? Well, really, because as you probably realise yourselves, business is software, and you can never stop developing. So we are creating new software, new applications for businesses, and we're helping businesses migrate legacy applications, keep them competitive. Of course, it's not just cloud-native operators like Netflix or Airbnb who are disrupting markets. For example, we've just built an entire web-based trading platform with mobile data capture capabilities for the 8th largest Lloyd's insurance broker. So that's digital transformation and data efficiencies revolutionizing a business. And that's an industry built on the notion that my word is my bond. So as a result of that investment and that application, that platform, offices in Dubai, Hong Kong, Miami, and Paris are now on that platform, and the opening up new trading partnerships, which should easily catapult that business into a top 4 global intermediary position. So that's a decades-old business operating in a marketplace that started in 1686. I mean, more proof if needed. I'll let you read this quote from Mercedes-Benz, talking about software being the differentiator in their business, and digital transformation being in full swing, and talking about themselves as a networked mobility service provider. You know, that's a significant statement. It's useful that as an automotive reference, because John's demo is going to feature an automotive-related scenario. So in terms of who we're working with, you'll see businesses on here that you'll recognise who trust us to deliver, and these are long-standing clients, and we have experience in heavily regulated environments, pharmaceutical, biotech, etc., and financial. So we're very familiar with compliance environments, and of course, compliance requires audit trails, and BPM is brilliant for that. So just a quick snapshot of the Red Hat JBoss middleware product stack and where BPM BRMS sits in that. As you can see, Red Hat, and this is a very simplified version of the product stack, just so you can see it clearly on screen. We talk about things around sort of enabling technologies, so foundation technologies you can see at the bottom, such as the enterprise application platform, integration technologies, the Fuse and the AMQ messaging, and up to the automation type technologies, such as BPM that we're talking about today. So it's useful to know that all JBoss middleware product releases these days come to the market first in their containerized version for deployment on OpenShift, the container management platform. So we are moving towards a world perhaps where containerized decision services will start to become more widely used as microservices architectured into, and those rules and processes are architectured as microservices into applications that are built. I'll touch on that more later. So very quickly, taking us into the BPM Suite, a snapshot of its capabilities. So the BPM Suite combines business process management, BPM, business rules management, BRM, and business resource planning and complex event processing, CEP. It also includes all the capabilities of the Red Hat JBoss Business Rules Management Suite, BRMS. Significantly, it enables users to capture business policies, procedures, automate business operations, and measure the results of those across a number of environments. So this is very much enabling software, which brings visibility, agility, and consistency to business process management. And it's empowering business people, users, to develop their own applications. And if every business is a software business, as we are encouraging you to believe that, you know that is to be the case, this is exactly what should be happening. You can't wait for developers to be doing everything for you, and you need to be more agile, more responsive. And changeability is arguably the most important non-functional requirement of any application. Just very briefly, before we jump into this, a flag that there are some name changes and rebranding coming up. BPM BRMS are rebranding. One has already rebranded. You'll have seen this week news about Red Hat Decision Manager 7 and all that comes with that, new out of the box and great new functionality and user experiences. But you'll see more about that as we jump into it. So I'm going to hand over to John for the next 5 minutes. Just before I do that, I did sort of touch on this scene setting. So we're imagining you're running a car leasing business for the purpose of this, and you're looking to set commercial parameters around rates and lease hire periods, amongst other things, and you want control over the terms, and you see the need for rules to be applied. And so that's what will be the focus of this demo. So if I can encourage you to set the screen in front of you to full view so you can see details clearly. John, you have the controls.
Thank you very much, Chris. Morning, everybody. So I'm going to take you through a demo of the BPM Suite, the JBoss BPM Suite. Here it is. You can see it. This is what we call Business Central, which is the web-based development environment for the BPM Suite. And as Chris was saying, we're going to do a couple of things today. We're going to write some business rules, and we're going to incorporate those business rules into a business process. And I'm going to show you how to do that really in a very web-based and I think we'd say a low-code type of environment. So I'll walk you through all of that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to model some data, because we're going to need to push some data through the system. We're going to need to store that data and report on it later on. We're going to need the data also to be able to traverse the business process. So some of the data items that we create here are actually going to influence the path through which we travel when we run our business process. So let's create just a very simple data object called a quote. And I'm going to model some attributes on that quote. On the screen here, we've got an add field button, which just allows us to add fields. Fairly obviously, we're going to need a customer name. I'm going to need to assign that to a data type. So you're kind of developing, but developing in a GUI. I'm going to create and continue and add some more fields. I'm going to add a lease period, because that's going to be pretty influential as to how our business process works. As a little tip, when you are creating numerics in your data object, if you can, it's a good idea to try and use primitive values. So I guess the developers amongst you will understand primitive values. If you don't, then don't worry, you just follow what I'm doing. The reason for that is because it's a lot easier and a lot less manipulation in code if your business process can basically just use primitive values. So you can see the fields that I'm creating here. I'm creating obviously the lease period. I'm doing a quote price and a quote reference. I'm setting a rejected flag. so that if the quote is rejected for some reason, or if the rules dictate that the period is wrong, then we'll just reject this outright. And the final couple of columns that I'm adding is the interesting stuff, the vehicle make and model. And that should be, I think, pretty much all of my attributes done. When I've finished, I don't need create and continue, I just do create. I can widen that column out, just have a look at what I've got. So I've got a customer name, a lease period, a price and a reference, a rejected flag, and the make and model of the vehicle. I'm going to save that, and that is my data model. Now, I can use other models. I can import models from another application if I want to as a jar, but I can obviously just create those data objects, and I can create as many as I want within a particular project. Okay, I'm now going to go and create some rules. Now I've got some data, I can create some rules, and the option here, DRL file, is for you to create a rules language file, which is obviously a language that you can use for writing rules. That's a sort of a rules syntax, which I'll explain in a moment. You do have an option to use a domain-specific language, which is like a business version of that rules language. I won't do that here. We don't really have time to do that, but it is quite a nice feature of the suite that will allow you to sort of translate your rule code into actual business speak. So I'm just going to create a file called period rules, and I'm going to, I suppose, cheat a little bit by cutting and pasting, just so that you don't have to watch me type and make all sorts of hideous typing errors. So I'm going to just cut and paste my rules language in here, but I will explain how it works. You've got two rules here, one called periods too long and one called period too short. Whenever we model rules in BPM Suite, or even just in regular native rules, you're always encouraged as a best practice to make those rules as short and as simple as possible. So don't try and put endless amounts of really difficult business logic and lots of if statements in here. You really just want two things. When something is true, then do something. And that's what we've got here with our rules. So you can see here, we've got a quote object, which is based on the data object I just modeled. When the lease period is over 24 months, then I don't want to do this quote, I want to reject it. Similarly, if the period is too short, the lease period is less than 6 months, I'm going to reject it as well. And you'll see these methods here, this set rejected, set rejected. These methods, it's interesting looking at these while I save my rules, because I'm going to go back now and just have a quick look at my data object and find out where these methods came from. If I go back to my data object, everything here was done in the GUI, but if I look inside the source code, you actually can find that we have things like get quote price and set quote price, get lease period, etc. We also have set rejected and get rejected methods, which will be very useful for us when we want to reject the quote. Okay, so this is just to show you that we have got a sort of a cross-reference from the data object to the rules. So I go back to my editor and check that. And actually, I've noticed an error here. My rejected is a double, and it shouldn't be. It should actually be a Boolean, because it's a true false value rather than a numeric value. So I'm going to change that very quickly. I did wonder why my rejected method looked a bit weird, and that's why. So let's go back and look at our Java now. And what I should find now is that get rejected method has actually changed to an is rejected method, because it's returning a true or false. So there you go. This is all proving that it's live, folks. It's not recorded. So the human errors are actually in there. Okay, so that is basically the syntax for rules language. You say when something is true, then do something. And they are very, very simple rules, as you can see. Now, I don't have to link this to a business process or anything like that in order to test this. I can actually write my own test. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to create what's called a test scenario. And a test scenario, this will be a period rules test, we're going to call it. And I can very simply have a little unit test which will test whether these rules actually work or not, whether I've got it right or not. So my given in this test is going to be that I have a quote. The data objects are often referred to as facts within rules. You'll hear about a sort of a fact model, which basically means a data model. So if I have a quote object with a field of lease period, that lease period is going to be mapped to a literal value, let's say 4, what should I expect to happen in that event? Well, what I should expect to happen is that my fact value, my QT, has a rejected value of true. So I wonder if that works. Let's run the scenario. It does. So my rule works, my rejected rule works if my lease period is less than 4. If I run the scenario where the lease period is 6, my test fails because actually I was expecting to get the quote rejected, and rejected actually equals false. So there you go, very, very simple test here. And you are encouraged as a best practice when you're making those really, really small and separated rules to write these tests for them so that they do actually work. So I've saved that test. I'll go on there. I'll go on to my DRL one more time because there's one more thing I want to do with these rules. Because I'm going to use these rules in a business process and we're going to have various points where rules are fired in our business process, I want to associate with my rules with what's called a rule flow group. So I'm going to add a rule flow group into my rule syntax. All it does is it allows you to group rules together so that they can fire at different points in a business process. And this rule flow group is going to be called period. So you'll see there'll be a part of our business process which says run these rules, and then later on there'll be another part of the business process which actually runs the price rules, which are a bit different. So there I've added my rule flow group. I can validate just to make sure that that syntax is correct, and that looks good. Green is always good, so I think we've successfully done that. Okay. You can imagine that writing those sort of rules could get quite time consuming, particularly when you've got lots of variants of data. Let me show you another method for writing rules, which you may have heard of before. It's called a decision table. And I'm going to let the GUI do a lot of the sort of work here and create a guided decision table for me. What a decision table does is it gives me all the possible options and allows me to set the results. It's just like writing rules, it's just a bit quicker. So let me show you how this is constructed. It's constructed with condition columns and then action columns or setting value columns. I've got a fact type of quote. That's my data. I'm going to match it to a literal value. And the literal value is going to be on the vehicle, first of all, the make, and then the model. There's going to be a few things in here, actually. There's going to be the make and model equal to something, and then there's going to be the lease period greater than or equal to. So I'm just going to call this column make. So I've got a make column. I'm going to carry on here and do the same thing with model. So again, it's the same fact type, so I'll just take that one. I'll match it to the field model, and the operator again is going to be equal to. When it's text, usually it's equal to. You can do starts with or whatever. Or vehicle make. Oh, I'm sorry, I've done make, haven't I? It's model. Did tell you it was live. So there's our model. And now we're going to do a condition where we're looking within a range because we want the price to be dependent on the range of lease period within a sort of a maximum and minimum value. So if our lease period is greater than or equal to, so this will be the period min, and that's our sort of lower boundary for setting the price based on the lease period. And then we can do an upper boundary, again on the lease period field, but this time it will be less than or equal to, and we'll call this one period max. So there we go. And all that's left now to do is say, well, what do you want to do? I want to set the value of field. I want to set the price. So I'll choose my QT variable, which is my quote. I'll set the price field, quote price, and I'll just call it price. All I have to do now is fill the table in. There's one other thing I'm going to add, and this relates back to the rule flow group that I mentioned a minute ago. I want these rules to fire in a particular place in the business process. So I'm going to add a metadata column, which is rule flow group. And that means that as I'm filling in my table, I can also put in the name of the rule flow group. So let's add a row. Let's fill the table in. I'm going to call this rule flow group price calc, because that's what the rules belong to. Obviously, we're going to go for an Audi. Of course we are. Let's say 6 months the minimum on this one, 12 months the maximum on that one, and I'm going to set a price of 100. I don't even know what that price is. I've just made it up. Add another row. Same rule flow group, because all these rules want to be fired at the same time. We'll go again on the Audi A3. Don't worry about the annoying message that the rule has no action. That's just because I haven't said what I want to do at this point yet. As you can see, what's happening is BPM Suite's actually evaluating whether these rules are valid or not, and whether there's any duplication, because if it's not able to decide what to do based on these rules, then it will tell you. Now, obviously, I'm not going to just let you watch me fill loads and loads of stuff in, but you get the idea. You can fill as many rows as you like here. I'm just going for the beamers, or a little bit of a change. And of course, this is going to be the most expensive one, despite the lack of functioning indicators. I'm going to save my decision table, and I can go on ad infinitum with any combination here that makes sense. But this is just to illustrate the fact that you can create these. I can obviously as well import a spreadsheet if I want to. There's a mechanism to do that, to import an external spreadsheet. All right. Now that I've done basically done all of my rules, I'm going to create a business process that actually walks you through the process of applying for the quote and then firing the rules at various points. So my new item now is going to be a business process. Quotation process. The business processes that you create are BPMN2, Business Process Modeling Notation 2, compliant. So they comply to an industry standard for designing business processes. They actually create XML behind the scenes, but we don't need to see any of that. We've got our graphical interface here. Start off with a process with just what we call a start node. So that's just a place for the process to start. In a little while, I'm going to show you how you associate that with a user input form. So the user types something in, and that's really where the process starts. What I'm going to do first of all is once that process starts, I want to file some rules. So I'm going to add a node to a diagram. That node can be many different types of tasks. So it could be a user doing something, it could be a piece of code being run, it could be an external service being called. In this case, it's actually a business rule task. I'm going to double click on it and give it a name, and I'm going to call this period rules, because the first thing I want to do is eliminate any rejections. I want to make sure that we are compliant with our lease periods before we do anything else. Now, based on that, we're going to have a decision. So I'm going to have what's called a diverging gateway here, and this gateway is going to go off and do something. It's either going to continue on and run some more rules, which I'll configure in a minute, or it's going to stop. So I stick an end node in there. Right, now these rules, fairly obviously, once it's done the period stuff, it's going to do the price stuff. So I'm going to have a price calc set of business rules here, and I'm going to mark that as a business rule task as well. What happens with the price? Well, now we have an interesting situation. If the price is above or below a certain threshold, then we're going to do different things in our business process. So if the price is, let's say, under 100 or equal to 100, because I think we got one or two of those in our decision table, then we'll just go through with no approval required. But if the price is over that limit, we're going to require some approval. So I'm going to add another task here. I can. I'll try and move that task around to make a bit more space. There we go. And that is going to be an approval task, but that's going to wait for a user to do something. So that's going to be a user task. And this is going to be approve quote. Now, obviously, once the quote is approved, the process will still stop. But there you go. I've basically drawn out my business process now. We're going to check the period rules, and if they are found to be outside of our limits, then we'll stop. Otherwise, we'll carry on to calculate the price. And if the price is under a certain amount, we just stop the process. Otherwise, we go to an approval step, which is a user task. I'm going to save that business process now. We can't run it yet. There's a few bits and pieces to fill in, but we do have at least a semblance of a business process here. Right. We're going to need to get some data to flow through this process now, which means we're going to need to make reference to the data object that we created, and also we're going to make reference to some of these rules. So we're going to link rule flow groups to these rule tasks here. So let me start off by defining a few variables for this process. And again, we can do this in the GUI. We don't need code for this. I'm going to create a variable, you'll be surprised to know, called Qt. And the type of that variable is going to be the data type that I created a little earlier on, so the quote data type. I'm also going to have a few more variables just so that I can control the process flow. I'm going to have a rejected variable, which is going to be a true-false Boolean, and I'm going to have a price variable because, again, depending on the price, I'm going to want to go to a different place in the process, and we'll just make that one an integer. So those three variables there, I've got a quote object, which is going to pass right through the business process, and I'm going to use that object in some of my input forms. I've also got a couple of variables which very clearly denote whether I go down a certain route or not. I'm now going to map data to all of these tasks. And again, I'm going to use a property sheet to do that. What we need to do is in this rule task, we need to pass in the data that we have. So we have a quote object of type quote, and it maps to a variable that we've already defined called Qt. We've got another object of type quote, which is going to come out of the task, and that's going to map to the same variable. So you see, all we're doing basically is we're passing a variable in, and we're passing a variable back out again so the process can use it. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with our price rule. Same data type. You can pass as many variables as you like into these tasks, and rather than having them all in one consolidated object, you could have them all as separate variables. So all our individual, vehicle make, model, price, all those things could be individual fact types on their own if you wanted them to be. But I'm going sort of object-oriented, I guess, by encapsulating all of that data into one object. Okay. So that, I think, is all the data mapping done. Every single one of these tasks has got a data input and a data output now. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more. With the user task, I'm going to need to give that a task name because I'm going to associate it with an input form. So I need to give it a proper task name without spaces. So I've given that task name in. I'm also going to assign an actor because there's no point having a user task if you've got no user to actually use it. So I'm going to give it my username here, which is BPMS admin. More typically, you will assign groups to these tasks so that more than one user can potentially pick up a task. But just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to put my own username in there. Okay, and I'm going to save that now. Also going to add some properties to the rule tasks. And as we mentioned earlier on, we need to associate a particular set of rules to a task on the process diagram. So in this case, this is going to run the price calc rules. That was in our rule flow group when we made our decision table. And similarly, the period rules that we wrote in DRL, we're going to assign the rule flow group called period to those. And there's one last thing that we're going to do, and that is we are going to make sure that our variables, our other variables, are populated correctly when we come out of the task. So for the first time today, I think we're actually going to write a tiny little bit of Java. We have the ability to set on entry and on exit actions, so trigger some functionality when we come into a task and when we come out of a task. So the on exit action of the period rules is to make sure that we set our rejected variable based on the data that we've got. So again, just to save you watching me commit loads of typing errors, I'm going to copy and paste this little bit of Java. All it is the context of the business process, which is kContext. That's a variable that's already given to us. We set the variable. We've defined a variable called rejected. And you remember from our data object that we have an isRejected method on the quote object. So that's the value that we're going to put into that variable. Simple. And we're going to do a similar sort of thing with the price, because again, the price is going to determine where we go in the business process. So we need it to be a variable. So we'll pop it in here. And again, this is calling a method on quote. This time it's the get quote price object, popping that into our variable. Except it looks like that's gone in the wrong place. So I'll just make sure it goes in the right place. Excuse me while I delete this. Okay. I think that should be quotation process, shouldn't it? What I'm going to do is just very quickly, because I saved that, I'm going to scratch that edit. I'm going to reopen it again and type it in the correct field this time, which demonstrates the value of regular saving. There it comes. And there we are. So hopefully my quote process is actually called the right name now. Yes, it is. And I'm going to actually select the right task and paste my Java in there. There we go. Don't actually need that. Cool. So save that again. I should have now an on-exit action for my calculation of the price and an on-exit action for my period rules. I didn't actually save that one, so let's put that one back in. There we go. Oh, on the same thing again, it does that with that. The reason for that is actually a little idiosyncrasy with the tab key. You've got to make sure you get focus in these fields. And I think that we now have everything that we need. Cool. Now that we've got those variables, we can actually branch the process in the direction that we want it to. So all we have to do is click on the output from this gateway here and set an expression. Can write code if we want, but we don't have to. In this case, I'm going to end the process if my rejected variable is true. In other words, if the quote has been rejected, and that's all. The alternative, in other words, the continuation of the process happens if the rejected variable is false. In other words, it wasn't rejected, we carry on. And a similar thing's going to happen with the price. This time it's going to be numeric, and the system knows that it's a numeric because if I go for price, I've now got options of greater than or equal to and so on. So in this case, if it's greater than or equal to 100, am I in the right place? Less than or equal to 100, I should say. We're going to just carry on. But if it's greater than 100, then we're going to branch the business process down to this approval step. So I'll save that again. Right, I'm actually done with my business process now. It should have everything in it that works. The data's being passed in, it's branching in the appropriate places based on the variables. All of that is done. Now we do sort of a bit of, well, I guess a bit of magic really, to generate some user input forms. And all I'm going to do is a button here that says generate all forms. Off it goes. And you'll see now that in my project, I've got some form definitions. I'll close my business process down, open up the form definitions, and you'll see I've got one process form, which is for the entire process. And I've got another form, which is associated with the user task of approving the quote. And any user tasks that you have will get automatically generated forms for them based on the data that we pass in. And actually, because of the data that exists in this process, I've got rather a lot here. I've got a bit too much, in fact. So what I'm going to do is start judiciously deleting fields from this input form. I only really need the customer name, the lease period, and the make and model of the vehicle, because everything else is going to get set for me at a later stage of the process. I'm going to get rid of all these other extraneous fields here until I've just got my 4. Now I can make the labels nicer. I've got a property sheet that I can use to make the label nicer and edit it. I can make these fields read-only if I want to, or mandatory if I want to. Got a lot of editing options within this, this form designer. I'm not going to use them right now because there just really isn't time, but maybe on another webinar I can show you all about how you edit these forms. You can even get crazy, edit your own HTML, you know, add colors and images and everything else. You basically create your own user interface in here if you want to. Just have a quick look at the approval form. I don't think going to edit this form. I'm literally just going to have a look at what's there. And obviously things like customer name, lease period, you could make read-only at this point. I'm not going to bother with that. How did it know what data to use? Well, based on the data that we passed into it. Yeah, that's how. So I actually think we have everything we need now to build this project and deploy it and run it, see if it works. Scary part. So I'm opening my project editor, and what the project editor does is it allows me to build the entire project, which means all the artifacts I've built so far, the business process, any data objects, any rules, any forms, any decision tables, all of that. So let's do a build and deploy and see if it builds. And we got a green. My word, it's worked. So let's see if it actually runs now. In Business Central, I've got the opportunity to look at the process definitions, that is the processes that I've built. And I'm able to start one off. And hopefully by starting one off, I should get my user input form, which asks me for my details. So let's say the first one, can't even spell my own name. I'll go for the lease period of 4 again. I'll make it an Audi A3, what the hell. It's not actually going to matter because it's never going to get that far. If I submit that, I wonder what's happened with that process. Can I see? Yes, you can, because if you go and look at the process instances, we should find there are none that are active, but there should be one that's completed, and there it is, the one I've just done. What about it? What sort of variables can I see? What happened to it? Well, the first thing I can see is rejected is true, and why is that? Because the rule's fired to say your period's too low. Can I see the pathway that it traversed through the BPM diagram? Yes, I can. And we can see that what happened, the bit that was executed, the bit in gray, is actually the fact that it got to period rules and then it stopped because the period was too low. Okay, cool. Let's try another one. This time I think we'll be compliant with the period rules. So Bob is going to go for 12 months. And, you know, guess what? We're leasing a lot of Audi A3s today. And let's see what happens with this process. Go into the instances. I've got another completed instance. It's gone all the way through. But what was the path this time? This time it got as far as the calculation, did the calculation, and then stopped. And what was the result of the calculation? A price of 100. So it went the right way. Good. All right, let's try a final one, which is hopefully going to go in a slightly different direction. We'll go 12 months, and obviously this is somebody who likes a Beamer. So let's have a look at our process instances now. Only 2 completed. That must mean that there is 1 active, and there's an active process here. What's going on with the active process? Well, look at the variables. Obviously the price was 180, it wasn't rejected. It's in flight because it's in the list of active processes. Where is it? What do I do now? Well, look, it's at the approved quote stage and it's waiting for user input. Now, I assigned that task to the BPMS admin user, so hopefully I have a task that I can complete. There it is, approved quote for that particular process, for Fred. So what I can do now is I can start that task. I can give it a reference if I want to. I can even reject it if I want to at this point, but I just won't. I'll just complete the process, and then quote ref is probably requires a numeric of some kind. And there you go. I've completed the process. And that is really pretty much the conclusion of the demo. So we've taken you through a a data modeling exercise. We've had a look at how you write rules and decision tables, which is a way of writing rules really, really quickly. We've also had a look at how you associate those rules with the business process and execute that business process right the way through. One last thing I just want to flash up for you is the reporting features of this suite, because it is really, really important, and I've got a lot of customers who are very, very keen on this. The reporting dashboards allow you to customize your data in the form of dashboard reports and KPI reports. So just having a look, for example, even at just the JBPM dashboard, which is one that's given to you out of the box, you can start to see things like the number of processes that have been initiated, who initiated them, the number of tasks that have been completed, how long the tasks took, etc. And I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but it's a very, very rich interface, and it allows you to create and customize your own dashboard. So it's very, very powerful. And with that, I am going to hand back over to Chris to finish off the presentation.
Thanks, John. Excellent. So yeah, the scenario there of leasing, car leasing variables, and the decisions and rules and processes that you could create around that in a 40-minute brisk run through. There may have been some thoughts on your mind as we were going through that. We've just put 4 or 5 up on here to stimulate the debate, I suppose. So, John, so how easy is it to connect other systems and applications into the workflow?
It's really kind of designed for that. You've got a couple of tasks that are pre-built to call external web services or to write your own custom Java code. But additionally, if you take the reverse view, the BPM suite can actually be consumed within your own application. So you can embed JBPM in your own application. You can make REST calls to a server-side BPM installation if you want to. It really is designed to be integrated with other applications.
Okay. And in terms of access and role-based permissions, all easily configurable?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can do it right out of the box with sort of file-based ACLs, but you've also got the ability to connect to your typical LDAP or Active Directory. So yeah, that's all very, very permission-based, and you can create your own business roles for the particular functions. So if you've got lots of user tasks that are to be executed by different departments, you can create the names of those departments, map them to AD permissions if you want to.
Excellent. So this notion of low code, very important in terms of agility and getting on and doing stuff. You've flashed a little bit of Java code up there, but it was minimal. So really, how much developer time is needed beyond the kind of setup and config side of this?
It could be a very little. It's really as much as you want. Again, as I was saying with the integration side of things, you can actually hand the suite over to developers if you want to integrate BPM into your own custom application. However, as we've seen, to basically create a process and rules and execute it and have it used by users is not a developer task, or at least it doesn't need to be a developer task.
Good. Okay. We got a glimpse of the reporting, which looks very feature rich. We scratched the surface of that, but these can be. Are these? That's live. I mean, it's what's the refresh on those? And are the dashboards just continually running in a line?
They are live. They can be based either on your own database. So if you've got persistence set up and you're persisting all of the business data, those data objects that we created, then you can report in real time on those. All of the JBPM data about process and task is stored in audit logs, so you can report on those as well. So it is extremely feature rich in terms of creating your own charts or your own tables based on that data. You can, if you want, base the data on Excel spreadsheets as well. So you can do it on a time basis. If you don't want real time, you can do a snapshot and have it in an Excel spreadsheet and use your reports based on the data in the Excel spreadsheets if you want to.
Excellent. And what about the web-based authoring tools? Limited to those or alternatives?
No, absolutely not. There is a very tight integration within JBoss Developer Studio. So again, if you are wanting to develop workflow applications within your own custom app, then you can do that. And there's quite a rich set of plugins for JBoss Developer Studio, which will still let you draw the diagrams, but obviously then write the associated Java code around that, so that the diagramming, the rule editing can actually be done in JBoss Developer Studio if you want to do that.
Excellent. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I think the audience seems to be happy with what we're doing. So, and we don't have any other questions from the floor. So I will try and just sort of wrap this up in terms of some key benefits. It's clear, I think, that this is about automating business operations, and that's a continuous process, continuous optimization of those processes. And the BPM Suite is really there to accelerate development, and that's hugely important. And as much as it achieves that by separating out the business process and decision object. So, that's where you get the sort of low-code scenarios that business users can work with this. And that, of course, all is about greater business agility and shorter development cycles and faster time to market. So changing things, changeability, prices, promotions, discounts, decisions around those, setting the rules, setting the parameters can be done without developer lag. This notion that, as much as you want to kind of get things done and we think we can move quickly, there was always a bit of a lag in terms of getting your hands on a developer. So this kind of removes a lot of that. That, of course, feeds, that's a collaborative process involving line of business teams, BPM teams, audit teams, operational teams. So that is about agile methodologies, which is what Tier 2 is all about. We work using agile methodologies, iterative processes, collaborative processes, delivering against specifications as they evolve, but doing it in an agile way. And of course, that feeds really into the speed equals revenue narrative that many of you will be familiar with. Do more for less and do it quicker. So I'm sure this has been useful, but actually we recognize that making a choice of which technology is right for your business is not easy, and conducting research in a way that shows project teams how to build sophisticated business automation solutions can be a challenge. So as a result of that, we've actually created a JBoss BPM Suite Kickstarter program, which is a way of offering clients a structured way to sort of handle this challenge, effectively giving you a sort of a try before you buy POC type evaluation. It's typically 5 to 10 days over a month period. It's personalized based on your own processes. So it allows all the stakeholders around the sort of BPM challenges to experience firsthand the benefits of the JBoss BPM Suite. It's done on a workshop format on your premise, and it's all about knowledge transfer, skills training, and mentoring. And the great news is you really just need internet access to browser-based environments to participate. So it's a hosted development environment that we create. All the artifacts developed during the Kickstarter, rules and processes, can be exported at the end of the program to allow you to reuse them in other BPM suites should you wish. And it also includes a free 30-day access to the Red Hat BPM Suite development environment, so you can sort of road test your processes. We'll provide details about the Kickstarter in the links from this webinar. So if there are clients out there who are interested in participating in that, you can talk to us via that. John and I can be contacted at Tier 2 using the info at Tier 2 Consulting. By all means, find us on LinkedIn and connect with us on LinkedIn. Very happy to engage in more detailed conversations on that platform. But I think that just leaves me to say thank you for joining this webinar, and enjoy your weekends.